Right when I think American Crime Story can't get any better, this episode happens. Hey guys, Karen for American Crime Story, The Peel vs. O.J. Simpson, Episode 9, Manna from Heaven, and I was obviously looking forward to this episode because I knew this episode we'd get back on track. Last week's episode, as you guys know, was focused on the jury. It didn't feel like the show. It felt like actually a completely different show. It didn't really feel like American Crime Story that much. It was definitely way different than any of the other episodes. Still a good episode, but just really different, and this episode, not only do we get things back on track, but this was without a doubt the strongest episode we have had so far. I mean, this episode was not only very affecting and not only very emotional and like I said, definitely topped episode 5 and 6. Episode 5, for a while, the race card was my favorite. And then episode 6 was my favorite. But the reason this episode's better is because it combines those elements of what made those two episodes great and expands upon it. And this episode not only was, very powerful, it infuriated me. It really did. Not the episode itself, but the subject going on this episode, it infuriated me that this actually happened and that something like this. I don't know if there actually was a Mark Fuhrman. I'm assuming there was, but if this guy was really as, I'm going to say, savage as he was in this episode, I mean, he really is a crazy guy. But let's just get in this episode. It basically focused all around the Fuhrman tapes and kind of how it affected everyone. I really love that. And right away, we get introduced to a new character, Lauren Hart McKinney. She's watching A Current Affair, and she gets a call from Pat McKenna, who's working with the defense, and as we know, at the end of last week's episode, we saw this anonymous tipper find out about the Fuhrman tapes, and obviously you knew that the defense was going to go after this, because their main goal has been to, depict the LAPD as this terrible organization, that, needs to be stopped, and this just adds that. And she says that she doesn't want to help him right away. He says he's working in the defense and asking if she has the Fuhrman tapes, and she right away says she doesn't want to help him. She was just writing a screenplay about the LAPD. She met Fuhrman and interviewed him for research, and before she can give any other information, she says she never asked to be a part of this, and she hangs up. She doesn't want to be part of this case. She wants to watch it, but she doesn't really want to be, a vocal part of it. She doesn't want to be very vocal, and you can understand. I mean, this is just a girl that has an interview with Fuhrman. There's nothing really else going on there. So Darden's then on the stand questioning a man who never heard a conversation going on the night of the murder, and this is a very important scene. Not just because of the fact that, this is a very powerful scene, the way this was done, but also, I think, because of the main subject of this episode, basically. Because Darden asks if the second voice sounded more mature than the first voice, and Cochran says a call for speculation, and Ito says it's sustained, and Darden asks if the second voice sound like the voice of a black man. Cochran objects, but once again, Ito sustains it, and Cochran says it's ridiculous. Ito asks Darden where he's going with this, and Darden says it was simply in good faith. They heard the witness state he heard the voice of a man that sounded black, and Cochran says he cannot tell by someone's voice whether they are black. That is a racist statement, entirely inappropriate. Cochran says he's offended that in 1995 they have to endure this kind of thinking, and and that's kind of true now still. I mean, you kind of do still refer to it as that. But you can tell that I don't really think Cochran actually cares about this. He clearly is just trying to go against Darden. And at this point, these two are not being professional. They're acting like two children. And Cochran says he's offended, basically, and Darden says it was the witness's statement. If it is, then he's the racist. They go back and forth in it like children. It gets really crazy. Ito finally puts an end to it and tells them that they need to take a recess so they can cool off, and they'll resume in 15 minutes. And Marcia obviously wants to know what's going on. She asks Darden what that was. Darden says that Cochran's so cynical, and there is such a thing as a black voice, despite what Cochran thinks. That's kind of just what you say, did they have a black voice? That's the proper term. And, it's clear that Cochran just, is trying to, just sabotage things for their, the DA, basically. That's basically what he wants to do. So basically, Marcia says she knows that, but his witness was failing, so Cochran threw a racial stink bomb to deflect attention, and now, because of this, the reason the witness was actually there, the jury's completely forgotten, because they're always getting on Cochran's side, because as we know, half of the jury is black, and Cochran appeals to them, and he's a very good, he's a very good person to listen to. Like, he's very powerful, what he says, even though it's fake, and he kind of is faking it a little bit. Cochran's just someone that can draw in people really well, and I think this episode really illustrated that very well. Cochran, Robert, and Carl then meet with McKenna, who tells tells him the tapes do exist and they're really ugly, riddled with uses of the N-word, many uses of it, and the amount of times we hear that word in this episode, I mean, it was crazy. It was really crazy, very hard to watch, and basically, Shapiro asks if they can confirm the authenticity, and McKenna says he's asked around his lawyers have shot the tapes to London papers and TV tabloids, and they heard snippets of them, and supposedly there was an offer for $250,000, and Shapiro asks why she didn't just sell them, and Robert says she doesn't exactly care about the money. She'd rather sell her screenplay since she's a screenwriter or a wannabe one. She couldn't make it to California, so she moved to North Carolina as a teacher to teach screenwriting, and Sheck asks how she can do that if she can't write a script, and Cochran says she doesn't know who she is or what she does. What matters is the tape. They need to obtain, he says, the tapes will allow Simpson to walk away. Sheck says they haven't heard them yet. Light doesn't just fall from the sky. Cochran says it does. God has brought them these tapes. There is something much larger at play, and this is manna from heaven, and basically, he feels this is kind of like the silver lining in their case. This is the thing that will, without a doubt, get them to win this case. And the way that Marcia and Darden act in this episode, they're kind of defeated. I mean, you can kind of tell how stressful this case is making everyone. Like I said, they all just want this case to be over at this point. Cochran really is the one that's, really trying to move forward and really still into this case. Everyone else just really wants this to be over. They want to be over. They want to just get to a verdict. And I think Marcia and Darden can kind of tell that they're losing. They really are losing. And Marcia asked Darden what the defense is doing. They got Ito to sign a subpoena for 30 hours of tape in North Carolina. Marcia says she doesn't understand and asks who the woman is, and just doesn't seem to make sense that Fuhrman would tell all this to a screenwriter. Because, yeah, I mean, this is an anonymous screenwriter we're led to believe. Why would he just randomly say all this stuff to her? It really would not make sense for him to just say all this stuff. And Darden says he's not going to pretend he's not surprised. Whatever's on the tape scares him. And Marcia says that maybe it's fiction, just Fuhrman and the screenwriter play acting. Maybe it's not real. Since the defense has been obsessed with creating stories, and this would just help them with that. Which, yeah, Marcia has a point that the defense is kind of being hypocritical here. That, if they did create a story, then the defense is being a complete hypocrite, because everything they've said has been kind of true, but really has been told to create a story. If you remember, Cochran, as we know, wants to tell the better story, and that's what's been getting them so, victorious in this case. And that's why the DA is not losing, because their story, while factual, is just not interesting. It's clear that the jury cares more about, interesting stories than they do about factual evidence. And we know why, obviously, because, they've been there for so long. They don't really care. They just want to, something to entertain them. And you can kind of understand that. And I do think that's the one thing the jury episode showed very well. It made room for this episode, showing why the jury has sided with the defense. They're not siding with the offense because they know they're right. They're siding with them because they're telling the more interesting story, and that's what they want to hear. They want to hear something interesting because they've been locked there for 8 months, and they have nothing really to do. They're cut off from the rest of the world. They just want something to entertain them, and that does that. So, basically, he says people like to hear stories. It helps them make sense of things, and he walks away. And I like in this episode the way that Darden and Marcia are more against each other than ever. This is the first episode where I don't think Darden is on the same page as Marcia. Obviously, he doesn't want these tapes to be released, but he kind of is understanding why they're doing this, and that what they're doing is not totally wrong. He understands that they have to do this, and, he kind of wants them to do this, actually, which is interesting. So, Cochran goes to the team, holds up the subpoena. They all applaud him for it. He says he spent his life fighting for a cause that, in the biggest case of all time, in front of the whole world, a magical piece of paper appears, and Lee says that they still need to get a judge to enforce the subpoena, and Cochran says he will venture out to do that. Shapiro says he will go with him since he discovered Fuhrman and invented this whole thing, and yeah, I mean, Shapiro's the one that Simpson appointed, and again, you really see in this episode that Shapiro's very outnumbered, which really sucks, but basically, he invents this whole thing. Lee wants to tag along. Sheck says they still have a case, and he doesn't understand why more than 2 people should go, because they have this case to deal with. They needed someone to be there to get details, and Lee says it should be him. He has a winning record in that jurisdiction. He's tried over 200 cases there. Cochran asks when, and Lee says it seems like yesterday, and tells him to understand things change really slowly down south, and he knows that the Carolinas like he knows the caramel apple, and Shapiro's annoyed since he hired all of them, which, yeah, he has a good point there, and I didn't think that Shapiro was coming across as being a dick. He's saying, look, guys, I hired all of you. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for me, and yeah, remember, Shapiro was the one that wanted Cochran. Shapiro was the one that wanted Lee. He wanted Sheck. I mean, he wanted all these people, and he recruited them. I mean, that was all his idea, so he can't just shut it down, but basically he says he doesn't grovel, but they need to make sure sure that they put his name on the brief because he is a big part of this and they can't just neglect him. He wants to be credited, which I like seeing. I like seeing this kind of like more mature side of Shapiro. In fact, this episode shows that Shapiro is definitely more mature than Cochran. You definitely see in this episode. Cochran and Lee then go to North Carolina. They head to the courthouse to get it. The bailiff brings out the transcripts, and I love the way this scene was done with Cochran and Lee. He tells them the judge will be with them shortly. Lee says he tastes victory. They think they have nothing to lose, but then when they read this transcript, something inside them just breaks. Basically, it contains many disturbing words, and almost every sentence includes the N-word. I mean, it is harsh stuff, guys, really. It's crazy, and Cochran says it's unbelievable and horrible, which, yeah, it is, definitely horrible, but it's also just as maddening that, again, Fuhrman was able to lie about all this, which is crazy. And Lee says they can sell to Fuhrman if Fuhrman is nailed and dead. He directly contradicted the trap he laid when he testified, and Cochran says it's more than that, it's evil, but this is what black people have always known, and now it's right there for everyone to hear. And Cochran tells the judge it would be a travesty if the tapes weren't allowed in the trial. They are tangible evidence of LAPD's racism. They are a revelation of truth, and he asks if he can approach, and the judge denies it, and this judge is not as, he's not Lance Ito. You definitely see that, and Cochran says with all due respect, they ask him to enforce the subpoena, compel McKinney to turn over the tapes, and it's extremely imperative they return them to California. The judge says there are no TV cameras in this courtroom, there's no need for gratuitous alliteration, and their request is denied. And you can really tell how much I think the TV's kind of changed Cochran. Like, it's really turned him into a lot more of this kind of like fake public figure, but at the same time, you understand why Cochran's really upset about this. Because Cochran asked the judges to say the tapes aren't relevant, they're proof of systematic civil right violations that black people have always known and what white people have never understood. And again, while this is kind of unnecessary, which, yeah, I understand the judge's point, that the tapes really don't contribute much of anything, they just kind of expose Fuhrman as being this guy that lied, and this witness that lied. It doesn't really do much in terms of Simpson. Cochran, this is something he's been fighting for all his life. We know since episode 5 he's been fighting for this, when he was with his kids and the police officer and everything. This is something he's clearly been going on all his life. He hasn't been able to fight it, and this is when he really wants to fight it. And basically, Lee tells him to calm down. They will file an emergency appeal, and this time he gets to do the talking because of the fact that in the South, he's not as welcomed, because he's black and everything, and they don't really respect black people as much there. And that's still kind of how it is today. I mean, they're more accepting nowadays, but down South, things are just not the way they are in other places. That's just how it is, and especially when you're black, that's just not a good area to really go in. So, it's not as bad now, but definitely back then it was really bad. Basically, Ito tells Darden that, and Marcia, as well as Cochran and Carl, that the court has the tapes and transcripts, and I like the way the scene was done with Lee, like the way he convinced the judge. He says he feels honored to be back. He knows that they'll make a fair decision to all who set forth in the courtroom, and this basically he gets the tapes. He gets the tapes. Ito tells Darden and Marcia, as well as Cochran and Carl, that the court has the tapes and transcripts, and he will wait for his clerk to make the copies, and he says he presumes it might take a while for them to wade through all the materials and decide how much of it they want to introduce, and Cochran says they will use much of, if not all of it, and Marcia says the Fuhrman consoling a screenplay has no bearing on a murder trial, and there's no reason to use the tape. She feels they shouldn't be used, that it's creating all this drama that doesn't need to be done, and she says it's just a defense trying to stick with their story, seeing what sticks, and Cochran says it will stick with practically everyone, and Marcia asks what the public has to do with this, which, yeah, it's a genuine question. I mean, the public doesn't get to make the final decision, so what does he care? And Cochran says they get to know the truth. This isn't just a smoking gun for the Simpson case, it's a smoking gun for the United States. He says Ito he anticipates will just be a pro formal request, and Ito says he wouldn't jump to any conclusions. He needs to review precedent and make a determination. Until then, he is an assistant, may review the tape, but other than that, they are to remain sealed, because obviously they need to make sure these tapes are as confidential as possible. They're very dangerous stuff, and if they fall in the wrong hands, I mean, it could definitely end really bad for them. So everyone's listening to tapes. They all want to know what's on there, obviously, because it's really crazy stuff, definitely. They all want to know what's on these tapes, and they're shocked at what they hear. We hear these really disturbing details. I mean, him going in graphic detail about he hates Mexicans, and again, every other word of his mouth, the N-word. And I gotta say, I really applaud Steve Pascal, who plays who plays who plays Fuhrman. He plays Fuhrman. He really, I think, gave it his all in this episode because it's hard to say those kind of words. I mean, really, especially when you're acting, it's hard to say that kind of stuff. It's hard for anyone to say that, and just the fact that he actually went for it, I really appreciate. So everyone listens to the tapes, and like I said, they're shocked at what they hear. And Marcia and Darden then go to meet with Gil, and we've seen Gil kind of be reserved. We haven't really seen Gil freak out. He's kind of been the one that's kept it together. This is the episode where you actually see Gil kind of lose it a little bit. Like, he kind of realizes that, yeah, we're losing, and this is terrible for us. And Marcia says they're fighting to keep the tapes out of the case, but while they were reviewing them, they heard something unexpected, and tell him to sit, and Gil says he hates Mexicans, he used the M-word, he's a sexist pagan, utters every racial slur known to men, and Marcia says that that's all true, but there's someone he hates that none of them saw coming, and then they play the tapes and turns that Fuhrman has a hatred for none other than Peggy York, who is Ito's wife, and I'm not really surprised by this. I forgot about this, but way back in the 4th episode when Ito was assigned the case, if you remember, when Peggy signed the forms, basically, what do you call them? What do you call them? Gil even brings it up. What was it called? The affidavits. When she signed it, remember, when she saw Fuhrman, she kind of gave him this look like she knew who he was. But then she signed and said she had no idea who he was. So I didn't think this would be a huge thing. I completely forgot about it, but I'm glad it came back in the episode because it was something that was very interesting. It was something I definitely didn't forget. Gil says he can't believe their star witness hasn't sold the judge's wife, and he can't believe this. Peggy is the highest ranking woman in the LAPD. Gil asks if she signed the affidavits, and Marcia says she did when Ito was assigned to the case. Peggy claims she had no memory of any dealings with Fuhrman, which seems hard to believe considering she reprimanded him for writing KKK on a Martin Luther King poster, and which, that's insane that he did that. But Gil says she can be called as a material witness, which means Ito would disqualify himself, and they're looking at a mistrial for $6 million and a year of work. So literally, if, if they want to release all these tapes and the part with Peggy's involved, Ito can no longer be the judge, and then they have to have a whole mistrial, and the entire thing starts again, which is insane. I love that we have this threat now, just the fact that there could be a mistrial. You can see that Darden and Marcia kind of want to do this, because they know they're losing, and they know that they've made a lot of mistakes, and he says that the constitutes will freak out, and this screams gross incompetence. Darden and Marcia then leave. He tells her to take a deep breath, asks her if they want a mistrial to start over, learn from their mistakes, and do it without Fuhrman. Cochran basically, do it without Fuhrman and everything. And you can tell that Darden kind of, wants to do this. He thinks this is a good way for them to do it, but Cochran then informs the team they might be looking at a mistrial. Everyone's freaking out. Robert says they can't live through this again. Shapiro says that they could move the trial back to Santa Monica, get a white jury, and Lee says this time they don't call Fuhrman. The LAPD isn't tarnished, and the tapes never get played. They basically just stick with factual evidence, which is what they should be doing, but again, they've gotten so wrapped up in this whole, let's blame the LAPD. This isn't really about Simpson anymore. It's about blaming the LAPD, and that's not at all what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be the O.J. Simpson murder case, and this episode, it didn't, the defense is not acting like it's that, definitely, which I thought was very interesting, and basically, Cochran says the scenario is unthinkable, that they are this close to admitting them, and asks if Ito knows, and Shapiro, Cochran, Marcia, and Darden explain to Ito what's going on. He says the whole situation is toxic, and he doesn't want there to be any institution. They need to discuss this in open court, and he tells the entire courthouse, by the way, I don't know who plays Ito, but this was definitely his episode to shine. I mean, Ito's been the most reserved person this entire show, because he's the judge. He doesn't really get to have much of a say. I mean, he does, kind of, but we didn't really get to see him. We saw him in the courtroom, we've seen him as the judge and everything, and I think he's done a great job, but this was really the episode where this really breaks Ito, you've seen. I really love the way this was done. He tells the entire courthouse what's going on, talks about everyone he had, things said about them, because, yeah, Marcia, things like that, and the whole case, and so does everyone, and he's wounded by criticism of his wife, and he thinks it would be reasonable to assume it could have some impact. He says women that work in male-dominated jobs are more tougher, than most, and, basically, there's also an argument that Fuhrman should be punished for making statements after Ito's wife, so it cuts both ways, and this may be a conflict for him, which could trigger a mistrial, so he thinks it would be best if another judge decides if this case can be continued before the court. Everyone's freaking out. They don't know how to handle this. I mean, this is a case that they've been on for a while. Now, all of a sudden, they're saying, oh, no, we might have to do a mistrial. Obviously, no one wants to do this. Everyone just wants to go home and have this trial end. And Dominic says that this is insane. They couldn't get away with this plot twist in an airport paperback. And Darden then asks Marcia what they should do. She says she's been thinking about this like crazy. The problem is it's too risky, and I love the way this scene was done here. She says it's perceived that they push the mistrial, then they have a double jeopardy, and then in that version, Simpson walks, and she couldn't even imagine how the public would react. She says she would love to do over all of her mistakes, including her life and her marriage, but they have to plow forward. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, but they have to move. Everyone makes mistakes in life, but they really have to move forward and accept that they made mistakes. And that's kind of just how life is, really, and I like the way that was done, because, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that Marcia wants to fix. I mean, look at her life right now. She is going through this marriage that's not ending well, with her husband trying to make her look like the bad guy. She never really sees her kids anymore. I mean, she's going through a lot, definitely, and I really did feel bad for her. Darden walks out, doesn't seem to agree at all, we see, which is very interesting. Like I said, it really seems like the two are on opposite sides in this episode, which I like seeing. Cochran then testifies to the new judge, John Reed, about how they don't want to leave their court. They fought to get the tapes. They are hard evidence. He says Peggy was caught lying under oath. He committed perjury, and the part that relates to Ito's wife is very small. And because of that, they don't want a mistrial. They propose that the tapes be given to Ito with that part taken out and, just find a way to get that part out, and then they're good. Because, this doesn't affect Ito if that part is not in there. And Reed says he's going to require time to review everything, and only after he has seen everything will know what needs to be done. And Cochran says they can't wait this long. Shapiro says he has to trust the system. Cochran says they have to turn up the pressure, and Shapiro just freaks out. He said the city's about to explode. They have enough pressure. He just wants this to end. He really does. He's tired of the media circus. He's tired of the constant stress. He really just wants to go back to his life and enjoy himself, because this case is a lot more dangerous and a lot more than I think he thought it was going to be. And Darden then flips out at Marcia, saying he tried countless times, and I love the way the scene was done, because Darden told Marcia countless times not to use Fuhrman. She never listened. This is finally a time when he gets to call her out on it, but she says she just didn't take him seriously. She put him in the trial because she wanted a black face, but the truth is she never wanted a black voice, which is true. She's never really agreed with Darden's opinion. It's kind of her way or no way. That's how it's been this entire trial, and he really feels like he doesn't really get a say in anything, which obviously is not good. There's a reason why he should be there. And remember, he's there kind of to replace, he's there to replace Hogman, because Hogman, of course, had that whole thing, which I don't know if we're going to see him in the finale, but we'll have to see. So Cochran gives a press conference and introduces black activists as Shapiro and Linnell watch. They demand the tapes need to be investigated fully and full disclosure to calm the community unsettled by the reports of their content. It goes way beyond Simpson, and people are angry to hear what they've always known. Linnell says it's terrible, and Shapiro says he tried to stop him, but Cochran's just not stopping. He's not resisting. He wants to get this trial big. Gil says that Cochran's throwing another riot as the whole crowd chants release the tapes, and a huge crowd's demanding for the tapes to be released. We see a report talks about what's going to happen, and Ito really thinks about what to do. He is in the worst position right now. He really doesn't know how to handle this, because how do you handle this sort of situation? And Cochran says to Ito that this issue can be decided with dispatch. They will present portions of the transcript that are relevant to the credibility of Fuhrman, 30 occasions in which he used the M-word and in which directly contradict the testimony presented under oath, and they will also present additional 17 extract speaks with personal experience about police conduct, planning of evidence, commission of perjury, and the presentation of cover-ups and false testimony in court proceedings. And Marcia says this is the hardest thing she's ever had to do as a prosecutor, and she doesn't want to be in the position of defending Fuhrman. Her job, of course, is to defend Nicole and Goldman, the victims of the bottom line, is not Fuhrman. It's the concrete evidence that the defense wants to use the jury to forget about the evidence and vote emotionally, which is really what's going on. The jury, the defense knows that the DA is very good at what they do. They have all the evidence they need. They need to find a way to make sure that they're still winning, and that's exactly what, is she saying here, and she says that she hopes their view is disproven by the jury, and that the jury actually doesn't listen to them, which we know they're not. We know the jury's just going to listen to the more popular story, and they actually look at the evidence because the rest of it is irrelevant. She then gives him papers of cases where racial epithets were deemed immaterial, and she begs him to act on precedent to not let the jurors hear those tapes. She says she's begging him from her soul, and you really see she doesn't want this. I mean, Sarah Paulson really killed it here. She kills it every episode, but she really killed it here. So Ito listens to the tapes, then hears Larry King do an interview saying whether or not he's screwed. No matter what happens, he's screwed. And yeah, everyone's going to talk about this for years, definitely. Ito then tells the court over the recess that he's had the opportunity to contemplate the issue at hand. He hasn't yet decided what tape experts are appropriate for the jurors to hear. However, he does feel there's an overriding of public interest in the defense's offer, and he doesn't want there to be any impression that the court would ever suppress any information, and these tapes become a matter of public concern, and many have asked that they become public. So he suggests the defense play the tapes to the court in its entirety, and that's really what they want to do. And you can see this look on Marcia's face, like she's really pissed, and Marcia says it's a double homicide, not Iran control, and Cochran says they made a decision. She doesn't get why they have to broadcast. Cochran once again said the public needs to see the truth as the country hides nothing. And as the court hides nothing from people. And Darden abruptly gets up, says their entire defense is based on lies and deceptions, and Sterling K. Brown, oh my god, he's had some incredible moments, but I really think this was his episode. I mean, he was great in the race car, don't get me wrong, but this was without a doubt his episode, because everything that Darden has said to do, no one's listened to him. He's always been the one that's kind of like there, but he hasn't really had a say in anything, and finally here he gets to show his opinion. He says, their entire thing has been based on lies and deceptions, just teasing the public, the media, by throwing them some tapes and flaming to extra political pressure over the judge in an attempt to pressure the court to release the tapes. And he says the case is a circus and the defense is the reason for it. The courts allowed them to do this, and Ito says he's close to being held in contempt, and Ito literally is yelling at him here, and Darden doesn't care. He says he should be, which the defense laughs about, and Darden says there's nothing funny about it. Cochran tells him to calm down. Ito warns him to take 3 deep breaths, then think about what he's going to say next, and you can tell this has really affected him. Like, Darden really feels like he hasn't gotten a say, and plus, they're being hypocrites, and Darden says he would like counsel. Marcia literally has to go up to him and basically talk about how she feels about this, which is very interesting, and she even goes pretty far. Ito says that she needs to take 10 deep breaths, or she will also be held in contempt, and she should take her walk for watch and jewelry. Like, she genuinely wants to blame it on them, because yes, she should have blamed it on the defense. The problem is they're on TV, they can't really do that, and obviously that's not something they can do. So Darden gets up, says some of his comments were somewhat inappropriate. He apologized to the court, means it all in respect. Ito accepts and says they've known each other for a number of years, and he knows his responsibility out of character. And that's why it was such a good scene, because Darden's not one to just freak out. That's not how Darden is. He's very reserved. He's very calm. Maybe he's upset, but he really holds it in. And this was really the episode where he just can't do it anymore. Everything he's done, no one's listened to him, and now because that all these things are happening, he knows it's their fault, and he knows that if things would have gone his way, it would have been a lot different. And I like the way that was done. So the protesters scream no justice, no peace, and Cochran is thrilled at what he's created. You really see Cochran kind of like a monster in this episode. I mean, I'm really seeing Cochran as the villain this season, but at the same time, you do understand Cochran. Like, you understand that this is something that he's wanted to do for years, and that this is finally what he really gets to accomplish. But yeah, Cochran is the villain in the show. If I had to pick a villain, it would definitely be Cochran. Because he's the one that's ruining everything. And the court then finally plays the tapes for all to hear, and everyone is startled by the violent details they hear. I mean, just everything that Fuhrman is saying, from, him saying the N-word over and over again, and him saying all this hatred about Mexicans, and then him saying that brutalizing victims is cops doing their job. I mean, to him, he's really not doing anything wrong, and that's the thing. I mean, he doesn't realize that he's saying anything wrong, which I think is very interesting, and just the way that whole scene was done, nobody wanted to hear these tapes, so basically being forced to, is really great the way they handled that. I mean, you could just tell this was footage that no one really ever wanted to be released, but now that it was, I mean, they didn't really know what to do here. So Darden watches Fred talking about how this is no longer about Simpson, it's about Fuhrman, and no one seems to understand or care that his son was murdered by Simpson. They came to the court months ago, and yeah, that's really the thing that's going on, is that, Fred really hasn't gotten a chance to do anything. No one's really talked about Goldman. Everyone's talking about Nicole, but not Goldman, and he's really upset about that, because his son was murdered by this, killer, and no one seems to be doing anything at this point. And again, like I said, people just want the trial to end, but it's clear that Fred doesn't want it to end without Simpson getting a fair trial. So Marcia tells Darden she just realized that Fuhrman's initials are MF, and he says that's funny, but he doesn't feel like laughing. It seems like it's all over. They kind of make amends here. I like the way this was done. Marcia admits that she's stubborn and she should listen to him, and Darden takes the blame for the gloves, and I like the way that was done. I definitely enjoyed that. You see these two have made amends, they're back to being friends, and at the end of the day, that's what they need to do. Even though they're going to go through a lot of problems, they are working together, and they need to move on from that. Marcia says they should have listened to each other. I love the way that scene was done, because yeah, yeah, a lot of this was based on mistrust. Marcia didn't agree what Darden was doing, so that's why she picked Fuhrman. She thought he was overreacting, which he clearly wasn't. But that's why she clashed with him about Fuhrman. And then the gloves, I mean, that was something that Darden genuinely wanted, and he got to do at this point, but Marcia was completely against. And I love the way that scene was done. Really amazing stuff there, and I've always loved the friendship between Marcia and Darden. It's one of my favorite relationships on the show. Like I said, I don't know if they're gonna get together, but definitely I like the way they handled this. So Cochran's on the phone. Someone is with someone discussing the tapes, and Sean tells him Ito is releasing a decision, and he's only releasing 2 sentences. And Cochran's obviously freaking out. He's not doing what he wants, and even though these sentences say what they should say, with racial slurs and everything, it's not doing what he wants. He thinks everything else is just too prejudiced, and Cochran demands him to bring the whole team down there, call up every network, and Shapiro tells him calm down. He's turning this into a referendum, and even though it's a decision, they didn't want Ito. Ito has given them enough to work with, because yeah, those 2 sentences say a lot. And Lee says he's knocked out the manufacturing of evidence, and that's what gets them to play into glove. Shapiro says they were hired to defend a client, not to burn down a city. He understands why he's disappointed. Cochran says there's no way he could understand what this is like. He does a press conference about Ito's decision and really how he's upset about it. And then we get this great scene between him and Dale. I thought that Dale left him, but it's clear she didn't. She's sticking by him, and it really shows how much she loves him. I definitely really like this. Because Dale basically tells Dale he'd hoped to have accomplished so much, and Dale says that he has those 2 lines say plenty, and he says he feels like he failed all hours of tape, and the jury will only hear 12 words, and I get Cochran's point that he really wanted to stick with this idea of taking down the LAPD. This, this group that has wronged him for so many years, he's finally wanted to take them down, but he got his message out there, she's proud of him for it, and even though it's not exactly going the way he wants to, people get it. I mean, there are protesters going crazy, and they're booing Ito. I mean, one of them, gets on his car, tries to attack him. It really is crazy, and I have to think this is how it actually was. I mean, it's insane, really. But Cochran calls Fuhrman to the witness stand, and everyone stares at him in hatred. The one thing that nobody wants to happen, but they need to get Fuhrman. They need a witness. They need to make sure this is going to happen, and here's the thing, though. Cochran's asking him all these questions, and Fuhrman says the same thing every single time. He says, I wish to plead the 5th. I wish to plead the 5th. And he is not going to respond to anything that Cochran says. He's not going to respond to anything that Cochran says. He's not going to admit he did anything. The tapes are out there. People know what he said, and he doesn't want to admit it. And that's the thing with Fuhrman. That's why he's such a great, that's why he's such a menacing person. He won't admit anything he did, and basically Fuhrman's not answering a thing, and I thought that was a very well done scene, and I love the scene where Lee says that a man of certain character, it takes a man of certain character to be hated by everyone, because the second that Fuhrman comes in, nobody wants to see him, because everyone knows who he is now. I love the way that scene was done, and it really shows that even though Fuhrman is very good at his job, he will never admit what he's actually doing. Despite the fact they want him to, he'll never admit it, and that's just how it's going to be. So then we get this great scene with Simpson and Robert, and it really illustrates the fact that Robert just doesn't trust Simpson anymore, because Robert says it was a real success as he changed into his prison jumpsuit, which he says he won't be wearing, Simpson says that, which he won't be wearing much longer. He thinks that he's, going to get out of here without a shot, that this trial, he definitely is going to get out of here, and Simpson tells Robert to have a good night. We can tell that Robert no longer feels Simpson is the innocent one, and that's the thing, Robert's acting like a friend to Simpson, but deep down, he doesn't see Simpson as a friend. He sees him as a killer. He sees him as this person he should not have trusted, and he really doesn't know what to do. And again, I really do feel bad for Robert, because like I said, he's in a very bad position. He's stuck by Simpson all this time, but now is realizing that Simpson is the murderer. I mean, there are no other witnesses. Simpson is definitely the murderer, and even though they're trying to defend him, he definitely is the murderer, and they need to do whatever they can to bring him down, and I think that Robert is definitely going to be one of those people that tries to make the verdict guilty, which we know what the verdict's going to be. That's the thing, and that's the thing like going in this episode. We know what the verdict's going to be. We don't need to know. We already know, but it's just kind of setting up how we get there. So Marcia's then told the ruling just came out in her divorce, which she gets primary custody and has everything, but Marcia doesn't, since she knows she's lost the case. I love the way this scene was done, because her assistant says, oh, you have everything now, and Marcia just gives us a look like, I don't have anything. I don't have shit. I have nothing. Because, she's lost the case. She's lost a lot. She's lost the case. She knows there's no winning this case. She knows that no matter what happens, Cochran is gonna win. She can't beat him, and it really frustrates her, but she needs to face that, and I really love the way that was done. But what's an incredible episode, guys. I do not know how they're going to top this episode. I have no idea. I didn't think they would top episode 5. They did. I don't know how they're going to top this. I really don't. This episode had everything I wanted. It was disturbing. It had incredible acting from everyone, and just the way this episode was done, I absolutely loved. How does the verdict come to be? I mean, we already know what the verdict's going to be. How does that come to be? We'll have to see what happens there. Robert and Simpson, I really feel that Robert's going to part ways with Simpson. Like, he's going to tell Simpson, I can't be your friend anymore. It's going to be very sad, but Robert needs to do that. He can't stick by Simpson more. Simpson is this killer, and I think Robert knows that, and that's why he's not really doing anything, because he doesn't really know how Simpson's going to react, and right now he needs to stick by him, and it's really sad, because in many ways, I kind of do feel bad for Simpson, because he thinks he has this friend that's going to stick by him when really he's not, and he doesn't even agree with the things that he's doing. But Simpson is this killer, and obviously I have no sympathy for him because of that, definitely. Cochran, I like the situation that Cochran's going through now, because everything that he's created, it's now weighing on him, it's now starting to get to him, and he doesn't really know what to do about it. We'll have to see what happens there. Darden and Marcia know they've lost. They know they've lost. There's no way that they're going to win, and it's sad, but I think they know they have to face that there really is no way they're going to win. Even though they want to win, they're not going to win. We'll have to see how that happens. But I can't wait for this finale, guys. I am so hyped for it. It's going to be amazing. We have one episode left, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen because the episode is called The Verdict, but we already know what the verdict's going to be. So what else is going to happen here? Are we maybe going to explore Marcia and Darden's relationship? Because remember, they were starting to flirt, but then they kind of shut it down. I'm wondering if maybe they'll actually start something, because if the case is over, I mean, maybe they'll start something. I don't really know. We'll have to see what happens there. I like seeing Dale motivate Cochran. I thought that was very well done. Cochran and Darden, are they possibly going to make amends? We'll have to see. And how's everyone going to be after this case is over? Here's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping the first half of the episode is the case, and the second half is how everyone deals with it, because we need to see that. We need to see the aftermath. We need to see where everybody goes. I mean, we know where everyone went, but the show is telling a story just like Cochran and his team are, and with telling a story, you need to tell as many details as possible, and that's something I really want to know. I really want to know what happens after the case, how everyone moves on from it. I can't wait to see how that plays out. But overall, guys, incredible episode. Absolutely loved every minute of it. I was glued to the screen the entire time. I loved every minute of it. You guys know how much I love this show. No matter if you guys saw this episode, I have no idea how they're going to top it, and we'll see you guys next week, which will be for 11/22/63, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.